this module, I'm going to focus just on what CEOs, what I call top class CEOs, usually founders of companies, say when they talk about how they run their companies and the decisions they make. Because to me, a lot of the statements I'm going to read to you are very consistent with this concept of dynamic capabilities. The module following this one will go deeper into dynamic capabilities, but I know I have to motivate this subject so that you'll see the absolute need to really master this concept, because as you see, top CEOs have figured it out. They're not using the same words that we're using here today, but they're using similar words and the same ideas. So with that, let me go to the first slide, which is what I call theory in action. And of course, the first quote here is one I read to you before, but I'll just say it again because it's so important. Jeff Bezos, who, by the way, has now just become, I think, the executive chair at Amazon, there are decisions that can be made by analysis. Unfortunately, there's a whole set of decisions that you can't ultimately boil down to a math problem. In other words, you can't quantify a lot of decisions. There aren't precise answers. You've got to make measured judgments. You've got to bring wisdom to the equation. It's not all about analytics. In fact, it's very little about analytics for many of these key decisions. And a favorite quote from Tim Cook. I had to go as far as the Taipei Times to find this quote, but this Tim Cook quote really sums up some of the key elements of dynamic capabilities. He says that Apple has the ability to innovate, and quoting Steve Jobs, and create magic. This isn't something that you can just write a check for. Very important statement. You can't buy this. It's something that you have to build over decades. So the elements of dynamic capabilities that we're going to discuss in a moment are things you've got to build into the organization. You can't go out and get a bunch of consultants to come up with a dynamic capabilities project and just adopt it. It's something that's organic. And that's another reason why you don't find it ubiquitously distributed. If everybody could write a check for dynamic capabilities and you could just augment your organizational capabilities overnight by writing a check, then competition would level up right away. So it's a very prescient statement by Tim Cook. And then Rod Drury, the chairman of Xero, in this case a New Zealand company, says, it's not the big that eat the small, but the fast that eat the slow. Don't think of agility as something that's just associated with little companies. It can be associated with big companies. So what's the driving force here is speed, not size. Small companies can be slow, just as some big companies, like Amazon and Google are pretty fast. Netflix in particular, pretty fast. And he goes on to say, we're a subscale market where there isn't the strong competition that we see overseas. He's talking about the local market in New Zealand. We are too passive and we are missing an opportunity to get organized and achieve a lot more. So he's saying, don't be insular, look at the global market and come to recognize that we could be achieving a lot more. We're getting too comfortable in our own islands here. And this is the language of dynamic capabilities. Not the entire framework, but it's certainly consistent with dynamic capabilities. And here are some more quotes. The next one I'm going to read is from Doug McMillan, who's the CEO of Walmart. And he says, given the effects of inertia, we need people to lean into the future even more than other companies might. We're trying to move large numbers of people to change their established habits. Once upon a time, a company like ours might have made big strategic choices on an annual or quarterly cycle. Today, strategy is daily. So if you're a big company, you coming up with new strategies almost on a daily basis. And just think of the challenge here. Big companies have got to move quickly. And actually Walmart is pretty agile for a big company. But it's not easy. And a lot of big companies are very plodding and very comfortable with where they're at. And that comfort is the kiss of death. Here's a quote from, the second quote is from Reed Hastings, Netflix being another favorite company of mine to illustrate dynamic capabilities. And Hastings says at Netflix, it has really been about, tolerating some level of chaos and error. So it's not about optimization if you have chaos and error, obviously. It's not about efficiency. It's about having some level of chaos and error so that you stimulate more innovation. But then the question is, how do you not have the chaos overwhelm you? We all know that things can get out of hand. The question is, can you manage through values and context so everyone is doing the right thing without central coordination? It's a jazz metaphor versus the orchestra, he says, which is consistent with what we were saying before. It's jazz, it's mixed martial arts. There's still part of the orchestra there, but that's if you're in relatively comfortable environments where there's not too much competition. And then we've got one here from Aaron Levy, who's the CEO of Box. He says, the moment that we get information that we feel is going to be critical, we will make decisions rapidly on that. So quick decision making, the moment you get this information. That has been built into how our culture, to the organization's culture. And you're constantly iterating and you're constantly testing ideas. You have to make sure that they line up against the long-term vision. But you have to be nimble enough to be able to constantly be evolving and veering the company in just slightly new directions. So it's all about change. It's about continuous change, but not any type of change. It's change that's fit for the moment, fit for the environment. As I said, dynamic capabilities is about evolutionary fitness. And think of that as being the goal of management, not about maximizing profits. It's about evolutionary fitness. And if you do maintain evolutionary fitness, you'll maintain strong profitability. But if you start focusing on profits first, you're likely to drop down to efficiency and you drop into the trap of going after ordinary capabilities. So think evolutionary fitness, don't think profitability. That's the surest way to get there. Now, how do you do this? How do you understand and manage both technological and organizational innovation? Well, we don't know all the answers, but very thoughtful people recognize the importance of this question. And here's a quote from Alan Greenspan. He made this in a speech at Stanford. He said, "We must begin the important work of developing a framework capable of analyzing the growth of an economy increasingly dominated by conceptual products." So the output of the economy is no longer traditional manufactured goods and industrial items. It's about intellectual property. It's about intangible assets. So we need a framework that can accommodate intangible assets as being the dominant assets. We need a framework that recognizes the importance of conceptual products. And I think dynamic capabilities does that. So this is just another reminder from an economist in this case that we need to change our mental models if we're going to understand the economy and the competitive circumstance we're in. And here's Sam Palmisano, CEO of IBM, no longer CEO of IBM, but he points out that innovation is about much more than new products. It's about reinventing business processes and building entirely new markets that meet untapped customer needs. So think about that. It's about building markets. The typical economic model has a market out there and firms address existing markets. But as Sam points out, no. Don't think about existing markets. Think about markets that don't exist that you can create. And in the 5G economy, of course, there's all kinds of new opportunities, all kinds of new markets that can be invented. So our trap, I'm, as I indicated, trained as an economist, and we always like to think that markets are always existed, and we sell into existing markets, and maybe we expand those markets, but in fact, in business, we create markets. We create platforms to create new markets, we create new goods. The iPhone created an entirely new market, the iPod created entirely new markets. There is latent customer demand that no consumer survey is necessarily going to be able to identify, but entrepreneurial companies can. And when they get it right, the future is unlimited. So here's a quote from Peter Thiel that I find to be very insightful. He's one of the founders of PayPal as well as many other companies, and one of the most prolific entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. And he's commenting here not on what he's done, but on his friend Elon Musk. And he points out another key element of dynamic capabilities. He said what was really impressive, and he was, I think, referring to Tesla and SpaceX, what was really impressive was integrating all those pieces together. And that is actually done surprisingly little today. And so I think this is sort of a business form that when people can pull it off, it's very valuable. In other words, remember we talked about asset orchestration as a key element of dynamic capabilities. It's this integration, both of things inside the company and things outside the company, to make things work together in a coherent way. And that's an Elon Musk capability that his friend Peter Thiel said, you don't find that very often. And indeed, you don't find dynamic capabilities everywhere. They're rather scarce, as you come to understand. It's hard. It's hard to build strong dynamic capabilities, but when you do, you're going to have a great enterprise. Now, here's a quote from Indra Nooyi. She's no longer Pepsi CEO, but when she came in, she made a very clear statement that, to me, recognizes this distinction that I gave you in an earlier module between ordinary and dynamic capabilities. She points out that I had a choice, that she had a choice. She could have gone pedal to the metal, stripped out costs, delivered strong profits for a few years, and then said adios. So she could have gone down the pathway of strong ordinary capabilities and efficiency and optimization. And 2/3 of the management consulting world would have pushed her in that direction, I would think. But she said no, that wouldn't have yielded long-term success, because she was thinking long-term. Too few of our CEOs think long-term, too few of our shareholders think long-term. So she points out, I articulated a strategy to the board, focusing on the portfolio we needed to build, the muscles we needed to strengthen, the capabilities to develop. There she is. She's actually using my language of capabilities, so this is a very friendly executive statement that I love to quote, because she actually sees it as a story about building capabilities. She didn't say dynamic capabilities, but that's what she meant. She said, we started to implement that strategy and we delivered great shareholder value while strengthening the company for the long term. And that's what dynamic capabilities is about. It's about the long run. If you're efficiency oriented, you're almost by default short run in your orientation. If you long run in orientation, you're going to be innovation and capability focused. And that's a lesson that too few firms really understand. And so, as you know, what Nooyi did was she invented a whole new range of more natural foods and so forth to push out through under the Pepsi brand and the Pepsi distribution system. So she innovated, and it's no longer just about Pepsi, no longer just about carbonated water, about carbonated sugar water. She made important steps in transforming the company while preserving its core values. And as I mentioned before, here's the Tim quote again. Excuse me for repeating it, but it's about putting the stuff together. It's about creating magic. Steve Jobs talked about creating magic. He could have said, we've got dynamic capabilities at Apple, but there was no word that had filtered down to the executive speak And so, in a way, the word magic in the case of Steve Jobs, or animal spirits in the case of Lord Keynes, are really good placeholders for dynamic capabilities. And then University of California graduate Bob Lutz, vice chairman of General Motors, makes similar statements about the auto industry. This is in his book Car Guys, or taken from his book Car Guys, which I recommend to you all because it's about how you don't win in the automobile business by being a bean counter. You've actually got to have imagination and love of the product and great engineering and great product design. And he basically says, and we talk about the industry in the 90s and the 2000 time period, ordinary capabilities are widely diffused. That wasn't true when Henry Ford started, but it has been true for the last 50 years. The operations portions of the automobile business are thoroughly optimized over many decades. You can read the rest of that for yourself. But look, everybody knows how to build a car, is what he's saying. So what determines the winners from the losers? It's those that can innovate. Where the real work of making a car company successful suddenly turns complex, and where the winners are separated from the losers is in the long cycle product development process, where short-term day-to-day metrics and tabulations of results are meaningless. Of course, we're talking about autonomous driving and autonomous cars and all of that, and that's about innovation, and we know very well that's not going to be determined by efficiency criteria. It's going to be determined by innovation-related criteria. And autonomous vehicles weren't on the horizon at the time that Bob Lutz made this statement, but what he said is certainly very consistent with that view. So let me pause, and we'll begin the next module in just a moment.